Hello and welcome to the Newsroom with Sana. Today we're going to take a look at a number of important stories. The first is Pakistan's fight against terrorism, which of course continues, and a very important aspect of this is Pakistan's relationship and nexus with the Afghan Taliban regime that unfortunately, despite the help of mediators like Turkey and Qatar, has not resulted in a real breakthrough in terms of guarantees or a verifiable mechanism to prevent any terrorist activity from within Afghanistan and then of course attacking Pakistan. And we've seen a spike in terror activities that continue, and most recently we saw DG ISPR also clarifying at a press conference exactly how the borders are infiltrated, and that the cross-firing that has started at the borders is done so to facilitate the infiltration of terrorists. And this of course worries some in terms of the kind of safe havens that already exist in Afghanistan and the support and facilitation that is provided to them. He's also outlined a number of challenges that make it very, very difficult in terms of border controls internationally. And so this single point agenda that Pakistan has must be met properly. Our second focus is going to be on what is happening with regards to the Russian-Ukrainian conflict that seems to be edging closer toward a resolution, at least in terms of rhetoric, in what a lot of the members of the United States, particularly Marco Rubio, has mentioned that he's hoping that these talks are going to result in a way forward, not just for a peace to be established, but for more Ukrainian support in terms of an independent and stable Ukraine. And so this is important in terms of what these officials are trying to achieve. And we saw that the US and Ukrainian sides sat down in Florida and had a lot of discussions with regards to making sure that there is a way forward. And then we also see important visits happening of the US side to Russia. And these visits are going to then perhaps further chalk out the kind of details that are still missing. We earlier know that there was a 28-point plan, which then shifted to a 19-point plan. But the aspects of what is currently under discussion is still not clear. The only thing that's coming out is a positive rhetoric, at least from both sides, as to what it is to be achieved, but it remains to be seen as to what comes out and is finally agreed upon. And lastly, we're going to take a look at what is happening with regards to manufacturing that seems to be down in most markets, including US, European and Asian manufacturings, which have faced the brunt of increased tariffs and increased economic uncertainty. And this, of course, is adding to the larger pressures that the entire international community is facing, so we'll dive deeper into that as well. For our first segment with regards to Pakistan's fight against terrorism, we're going to bring this further with Dr. Kaleem Imam, who's a security analyst, and talk to him at length about what really is going on. Thank you very much, Dr. Kaleem, for joining us in the newsroom, and I'd like your take on what you think currently is happening with reference to where we stand on the nexus with the Afghan Taliban regime. Pakistan, of course, has tried numerous measures in terms of peace and dialogue, engagements with the Afghan Taliban regime, and has always preferred peace. And most recently also we've welcomed the efforts of our mediators in this regard as well. But there's no real breakthrough. And so this single point agenda that we have of a guarantee and a verifiable mechanism is something very, very important and indeed necessary for this fight against terrorism. But in case we see that that is not a stance that the Afghan Taliban regime has or is willing to provide, how then can we move forward in terms of protecting our borders, in terms of ensuring that there's no terrorist activity emanating from within Afghanistan against Pakistan, and that a mechanism is developed?
Thank you, Sana, for having me in your show. You are absolutely right. Pakistan has uh, on numerous occasions try to pacify, use diplomatic channels, use regional uh, countries, the United Nations and other nations, to actually get over with what's happening in these regions. The TTP, the TTA or the Taliban are not backing out of what they are doing, and probably they are being instigated and being supported by some vested interest. There are many players in the globe, who would like this place to be unstable for the very reasons that chaos remains in this region. But then, what should Pakistan do? Well, we must continue with whatever dialogue that we can do. Dialogue is always should always be the first option. But we must improve our intelligence. We must improve our what you say your first line of action response. For example, when I talk to KP and Balochistan police officers, I want their role to be enhanced. I want their plan and strategy to be chalked into whatever is happening. And I believe that internally we need to respond. We need to take all those people who are already present over here. Yes, we are having tashkils. We see people coming across from the border. There's no denial in that. They get sanctuaries. And whether the Afghans can actually control them or not, or do they want to control them or not, that's another question. But we must tighten our security, which means that one, we must improve the performance of the first responder. The administration should play a very important role. And like I keep saying, inclusivity, which means you have to involve your community. You see, at times it seems that the community and the people who are taking action, I see a gap between them. And every day, or almost a week, we see a lot of these people being taken to task, but we also see our own people losing in the process. So we need to improve our operational readiness, operational proficiency, and we need to ensure we take them on. Yes, we keep on talking to them, but we need to choke on and try to ensure that those bottlenecks come up with those bottlenecks that they hinders their ability to come in this uh, part of Pakistan.
Right. Dr. Kaleem, there's of course a lot of discussions on making more stringent efforts in protecting our borders and ensuring that there is no cross-border infiltration by the terrorists. But DG Asba on Friday also really clarified in terms of what is the activity that is happening in terms of the firing that is there to facilitate these movements, and in terms of the challenges that are faced internationally to protect borders. And so I want your take on, when we take a look at what Pakistan can do in terms of making sure that we are able to protect our borders despite whatever activity happens outside of them, or whatever partners or supporters or sponsors that we have outside of the borders. Is there more you think that can be done in terms of ensuring the thickness of our borders, ensuring that there is less infiltration, ensuring that more border control mechanisms are in place?
Yeah, yeah, border, I would say, is one of the major challenge now. We do have a fence border over there. We need to ensure that we don't allow those infiltrations to take place. That's part one of what I would like to say. The part two is that they are already inside Pakistan. They roam around in this all South Waziristan and all these regions. How do we take them on? We take them on through the local police, through the community, their support, their making them and getting information for them. We improve our intelligence over there. We improve like I said, the first responder response. You see, the deep inside these border regions, they are attacking the security offices, the police stations, the police vehicles. So they are already inside. So what are we doing to stop them? We had a very successful operation in DI Khan just a couple of days back. We also saw how the security forces uh, very courageously and very strategically handled the Ghana issue. And we also saw that how the police responded when the FC headquarters was attacked. So, but they are inside. For me, the worrisome part is how to get or hold these people who have facilitators, planners, who are actually helping them in mobility. They reach as far as Islamabad. So there's something we need to work on and think and rethink. What is happening. Yes, we need to tighten our borders, but more important is that those who are inside, how to stop them basically, because they are being able to carry out one or two attacks almost every other day. So we need to rethink how we are going to actually handle these groups which are already existing inside.
Right, and this is important also in terms of the way that the National Action Plan was envisioned, and there was a lot of kinetic and non-kinetic measures that were in place. Looking back, and of course, in the ways that Pakistan had already won this fight against terrorism, and of course, unfortunately, due to certain decisions that were taken, this is something that we're facing once again within the country. And so I want your take in terms of how exactly do you perceive the implementation of the National Action Plan, how successful we were in making sure that all of the elements as part of the plan were followed in true letter and spirit, and whether or not there is a need for re-evaluation on that front.
You see the national action plan that we made in 2014, again, it was a knee-jerk reaction. You only go for the operation when you haven't done your other part of your homework. Well, you have a national action plan. There were 20 points. Now they're left with 14. The point is, right now that we are fighting a war against these extremist and radicalized elements and the cross-border infiltrators, Are we still on the other side doing something which is non-kinetic? Are we still trying to curb or to, like you say, bundle out those swarms, where these mosquitoes, are being produced? We are not still doing that. We are going again after the terrorists, but what efforts are we making to actually kill terrorism? That's a non-kinetic part, which means the education, the facilities, the development part, the part that the administration and the police needs to play through community policing. I think that is still very weak. There's an element of distrust, and people are people so forthcoming to give you information of what's happening, because all these infiltrators, they move through the towns and villages. And if you have a good mechanism, like the we see in KP, they are going to reactivate their special branch. But I believe that human intelligence again is one of the very vital aspects to get hold of this criminals element. But going back to National Action Plan, I still believe that we are still very far away. The most important part of the National Action Plan is criminal justice system, reforms of criminal justice system, getting hold of a people and getting him convicted, sending him to jail, and also giving him a chance to get mainstream and come back and live a normal life. Nor do we have a de-radicalization program. All these infiltrators or people who are siding, and many of them may like to be de-radicalized. Are we giving them any space? That's a question. And at the same time, are we curbing all those fertile grounds, which actually becomes an enablers, as a result of which people keep silent or join them in? So the National Action Plan, I think, is still something that we need to rethink, and we need to give a civilian facade to it. We need to ensure that the strong arm actions which is required only comes occasionally. You see, you have a civil armed force, and you have a police, a huge police in KP and Balochistan. And I believe that they are being underutilized or they are demotivated. But I see that recently KP and even Balochistan have got hold of some. The government, have been very forthcoming in the context. They got some modern weaponry, and I'm sure that that's going to play a very important part in it. And I also bring the stakeholders engagement. Everybody needs to know what its role is. And I keep asserting and I keep saying that you need to make the first responder very effective, very professional, and give them a space and chalk out a plan which comes out where they are ready to take the ownership.
Absolutely right. Thank you very much, Dr. Kaleem Imam, for joining us and being a part of the discussion. We've also been joined in the newsroom by Air Commodore retired Mr. Khalid Chishti. Thank you very much, Isisab, for being part of the show today. I'd like your perspectives too, because it seems that there is a lot that Pakistan is facing in the fight against terrorism, and we'll come to what we can do within our borders. But first, I want your take on what is the given direction at the moment to where Pakistan is heading, given the fact that we have seen that the Afghan Taliban regime are not willing or are not capable in terms of providing the security guarantees. They haven't really given us any of these reassurances as part of the mediation efforts that have been put forward by Turkey. And it seems that given the kind of rhetoric and steps that are being taken from their side, that we're nowhere close to that happening also. So given these circumstances and the spike in terror activities in Pakistan, how does Pakistan protect its borders from these attacks?
Thank you very much for inviting me, Ms. Sana. I think this is a very important question. Obviously, everybody keeps asking, and we need to deliberate on this. Unfortunately, what I believe is that the Afghan government is not behaving like a government. They're behaving like a group of armed group of those struggling kind of mafia, which obviously trying to enforce their decision through the gun. If they start to behave like a state, obviously there are many people, many countries who would have sided on them. The biggest problem has been that probably they still have the same mindset. If they have to struggle as an armed group, they have to enforce everything through the gun. And that is why you see the countries, neighboring countries are having started to have the feeling of discomfort. The element of terrorism, which was already there on Pakistan side, has flown in towards Tajikistan. The regional instability obviously is being questioned because of their irresponsible behavior. And if they blame us that we are the country, for example, for the discussion's sake, that we are not supporting them from that angle, Afghanistan has been a source of trouble even during 1970s. What to talk of later when the Afghanistan was captured by Soviet Union. From 73 to 79, they had 6 government change, and most of the heads were eliminated or killed. That's the history that they have. And if you want to go back to 1800s, the British had over here, they had negotiated with them and they served them through obviously making them participate and obviously giving them way so that they continue to rule their areas. So they were kind of given a financial or other bribes to keep the peace on the western border. That has been unfortunate, the way of living of that. And I keep saying that in their area, it's generally, it is considered that the instability they consider as a stability. And I always believe that because they think that by creating a stability or having a stability in that area, they stay relevant. They stay connected to the world. The world come asking them what's wrong. The world starts to support one group or the other. And there are about 20 groups that we know. And they have been funded, supported, and obviously encouraged by so many other forces globally. And that's the kind of race that's going on. It's a power. They're power hubs. They're not even the government. They're not even the elected people. They're not accountable to their own people and civilian population. They just hold the power through their predominantly because of the holding of the weapon. That has been unfortunately. But coming back to your point, Turkey has made so much of effort. Doha made so much of effort. I think we need to move on and let the message spill over to the other part of the world and let them realize that how irresponsible. One, let me stress that the American thought and saw that was the terrorist attack on their two soldiers, uniform personnel. So that is an indicator. Everything obviously related to terrorism is always bad, but something positive can come up. Obviously, Americans should now realize that this is called terrorism, and this is the pain which is inflicted on the individuals and the families, obviously, who are the victims of these. So I think there's globally the more of sympathy is gained by Pakistan now. I was watching some global channels. They tend to realize, you mentioned probably in a program, that even Europe and Western countries have started to realize that this is a menace. Now we need to come and obviously face it and at least side by Pakistan.
Right. Mr. Chishti, there's also, of course, concern then as to how we're going to be dealing with the fight against terrorism within our borders. We had the DGISPR speaking last week about the challenges of making sure that a border is protected and the kind of mechanisms that even if in place do not guarantee that there's not going to be any infiltration, and that may be so. But in terms of making sure that the terrorist activities within Pakistan are curbed, how are you taking a look at the direction and action that is being followed by Pakistan forces inside the borders in terms of the plans that were made, the National Action Plan we were just discussing with the earlier guest as well? Do you think that there is more that can be done in terms of the strategy or direction or operational measures that can be taken within our borders to protect these attacks from affecting our citizens?
That's another good question, Sana. You see, there were around 30,000 vehicles going up and down Afghanistan and Pakistan when it was relatively a comfort zone. 30,000 vehicles is a huge number. It's such a lot of trade going on, people moving this side or that side, obviously. And that actually enables those terrorists to obviously move in and out of Pakistan. That's number one. The unfortunate history on the visa side has been that it is 2016, it's just about 9 years back, that Pakistan government enforced the visa regulations on this border. Earlier, there were permits or working permissions or something like that, and something NOCs, and the visa was enforced 2016. We need to be more rigid on this. But you see, because this is the government on the other side is having a poor governance. They do not have a good diplomatic record. They do not have a political or civil rights record. So you cannot expect them to guard and watch on our borders. 30,000 vehicles which were going in, is it humanly impossible to filter out everything? So we need to be more strict. The visa needs to be more religiously enforced. And obviously, as I said, that, and while we're doing that, we continue to send the message to the Afghan people that whatever we are doing is not against the people of Afghanistan. if there is any hardship because of the shortage of food or supply or medicine or whatever, the daily necessities, it is because of the behavior or irresponsible behavior of the regime, the government that they have. So I think we need to continue to play multi-prong option of multi-prong strategies. On one, we to continue to extend goodwill to the Afghan people. On the other hand, in-house, because the Afghan government is not going to cooperate with us, we need to continue to enforce more strict discipline and accountability on the visa part, the transportation part, and the trade, obviously, which is anyway being checked in. So coming back to the last point from my side would be that, you see, people need to be involved. They need to be stakeholder of KPK and Balochistan. I am referring to them. Because in 1800, you'll be surprised that there used to be Khyber Rifles, there used to be Khorram militia, there were Chaghi militia, and there were militias. The British, what they did was that they had made the local people responsible by enrolling them into their army or semi or civil armed forces. So they were managing it. And at that time, the general who came up with the idea, later on, 1907, we had Curzon, who was the viceroy of Britain. He amalgamated all these into a frontier corps. So imagine 1907 frontier corps was made, and with the plea that local people should be involved. And he used to say that the keepers of the land should, obviously the owners of the land should be, keepers of the land should be the owners of the land, which means that people who are living there should be made accountable and responsible. And there come the jirga concept, obviously, to come into place. And I think we need to involve more local people to have more into the government and have them as stakeholders themselves.
Right. Thank you very much, Khalid, for joining the newsroom and sharing your valuable insight with us. It's important, of course, to see what measures can be taken in terms of what Pakistan's stance is at what is needed from the Afghan Taliban regime in the single-point agenda of security guarantees, and also both within the borders as to what measures can be done to curtail the spread of these activities and to ensure stringent measures of terrorist infiltration. We're now going to be taking a look at our next segment that focuses on what is happening with regards to discussions around ending the Russia-Ukrainian conflict, and something that the US president is very keen on achieving. And it seems that there are certain discussions that are moving ahead. How much of them are actually resulting in something tangible to end this conflict remains to be seen, as we're hearing reports of the 28-point agenda being changed to a 19-point. And then now a lot of the discussions that are under place, it still remains to be seen exactly what is coming out of them. But at least the rhetoric in itself is pushing towards a more independent and stable Ukraine. And so it might be a different direction than what was earlier taken. But let's speak to Dr.Aamna Khan, who's InteRussia Fellow at MGIMO University in Moscow, and we'll take her input on this too. Dr. Aamna, with reference to how you see the current direction and the discussions that are coming out of talks on various fronts with various leaders to end this conflict, where do you think are the key points that still remain? Because earlier there was a 28-point plan that was pushed forward that was labeled as being more tilted in Russia's favor, and then we had a different plan, a 19-point plan that had surfaced. And now we see that Ukrainian and US officials have sat down together in Florida and chalked out perhaps more key aspects of where this is heading. How do you think that this progress is being viewed in terms of what can be negotiated upon and what cannot be, particularly by the Ukrainian side? Will they be willing to give up some of the key aspects that were earlier bone of contention?
Thank you, Sana. So talking about the peace talks which are going on, and as you have already mentioned that now the points have reduced to 19 points from the 28, but still there are a lot of things going on, and still there are a lot of issues that still remain politically indecisive, or still remain, complicated. As today, Secretary of State Rubio said, they are productive but complicated. So they have definitely made some progress on several technical issues, but the most politically sensitive questions have remained unanswered so far. So, for example, the issue related to NATO involvement in future with Ukraine, and Russia's future role, as well as the territory control of the situation. So these situations still remain like divided. Both the parties are divided on this, and the talks are moving forward, but the fundamental obstacles are far from settled so far. So it will really depend on both the parties that how they keep the things forward going, and like these demands especially related to the security and restrictions on future NATO deployments and framework for reconstruction, such things still are in question. And I think about the future, it will be really much depending on like the tomorrow's meeting with President Putin that is going to take place in Moscow. So until then, it will be very difficult to predict the future about the deal. But still, like especially the issues related to the territory occupation is still the highlight, which is creating a problem. And like of course, Ukraine is not agree on it, that they don't want to give that part to Russia, and Russia really want to have it. So still we have to see like how the things go on.
Right. Dr. Amna, in terms of what the US president really wants to achieve, of course, he talks about being a champion of peace, and he seems to be someone very eager to have this achieved. He's still not being able to influence Mr. Putin despite the relationship that these two have developed. And so I want your take on how do you think that these two individuals can really chalk out the details, and whether Mr. Trump has the kind of influence that he envisions, and will he be able to make Mr. Putin agree to what he has previously not?
Well, as I said earlier, that it will be really depending on what will happen tomorrow, like how the things go on with President Putin. But as far as Mr. Trump is concerned, I think he will try his best, or he really want to make this peace deal, right? Because he really want to show the world that he is the champion of peace dealings around the world. So he will be, I think, doing pushing it very much forward, and like maybe playing the very important role in these negotiations, and would very much happy if he could broke this deal between the two countries, so he could be the peacemaker. So but as I mentioned earlier, that it will be very much depending on, like, of course, Mr. Putin as well. But I think he had previously he had some good meetings with Putin and with President Putin, and there are chances that he might be able to convince him to make some compromises, but he might be able to convince Ukraine as well to make some compromises as well, because both the parties now, if they really want to have the peace deal, they really have to make some compromises, especially on related to the territorial disagreement and NATO related things. So let's see.
Right. Dr. Amna, there's of course also talk of what really is going to be the way forward in terms of whether or not we'll have a ceasefire initially before a lot of these details are chalked out, or a lot of these details need to be chalked out before a ceasefire can be in place. Because while of course we're talking about these negotiations taking place, there is more advancement at the Ukrainian conflict, and there is of course a lot of people that are still suffering, and it's adding more pressure and fatigue to all the parties involved. Do you think that that's something that will be acceptable, particularly to Russia?
Sorry, I didn't hear you properly. Could you please repeat the question?
Sure. My question is whether or not a ceasefire first and for negotiations to continue later is an option for Russia, because this is something that earlier was not accepted by Mr. Putin.
I think now maybe they will consider it as an option, because from the both sides, people are suffering, especially the common people. And recently they had a lot of drone attacks both in Russia and Ukraine, and many people have died as well. So maybe if, because this peace deal doesn't seem very simple, and there are a lot of complications involved, and definitely both the parties will not agree to all the points and everything, and they have to make the big compromises, and both of them are not ready. So maybe at the moment, just the ceasefire will be a good option, will be a good thing to do, so that they can go to the other points later on, like related to the reconstruction and everything, in which Europe is very much interested. So it can be, it may be the point that they will be discussing tomorrow. So let's see what happens.
Right. Thank you very much, Dr. Aamna, for joining us and being a part of the discussion today.
Thank you.
We'll take a short break here and be right back with more news, and we'll be talking about what is happening with regards to manufacturing in Asia, Europe, and the US. Welcome back to the newsroom with Sana. Today we're going to be taking a look at what is happening with reference to the economic situation in the entire world, particularly in terms of manufacturing that seems to be down in terms of various markets, including those in the US, Europe, and Asia. And a lot of these factories and manufacturing elements have suffered because of increased tariffs, of uncertainties in the larger macroeconomic indicators, and the way in which the geopolitical aspects of the world are affecting the supply chains. And for this, we're going to be speaking to Dr. Aima Mehdi, who's going to give us more perspective on this front. Thank you very much, Aima, for being part of the show today. I'd like your perspective on what you really think is going on. It seems that a lot of the major manufacturers are taking a hit of the kind of uncertainty that we see today. What is so different or unprecedented about what the world is facing in terms of these uncertainties that have caused this?
Thank you. Thank you, Sana, for having me on the show. The topic is really timely and very interesting about global growth, reduction in demand, tariffs, etc. So, what actually happens is when there is uncertainty in policies, and by policy, I mean things like tariffs, quotas, taxes, import taxes, embargoes, there is a direct proportional impact on consumer demand. And when consumer demand falls down, there is then a directly proportional impact on the producers, such as factories and industries. So, in the last 12 to 18 months, or beginning from the Trump's regime, we've seen that there has been a lot of naysay about tariffs on China, India, other European countries, including the UK, to things that are exported to the US and things that are being exported locally. So what actually has happened because of this policy uncertainty, people or big companies are not placing orders. And because they're not placing orders, industries are not kind of producing to the limit that they should be. The second problem is because there has been so much inflation, and in post-COVID period there has been an increase in the cost of living, and that has actually had a proportional impact on consumer spending because consumers do not have enough money to spend on things that they would actually spend on, and that has had an impact on inventory levels for a lot of businesses because businesses have a certain amount of inventory. They do not want to order more of their stuff. So there are two things here. There's a policy effect and there is a global inflationary effect, which has reduced the spending levels by consumers. There's also a lot of uncertainty in terms of interest rates, in terms of bank rates, and because lending and borrowing activity has been in a slump, which is why we haven't seen any real growth in industries and businesses. It is also timely to mention a report by Aima, which had predicted around 3.2% global growth for 2025 and 3.1% by 2026. So the growth numbers where there used to be 7 to 8 to 10% have been quite low on a global level. And one of the main causes is the constant retaliation between the US and China. China used to produce most of the goods and people used to buy. Now, because there are lots of tariffs and stuff, people don't want to buy expensive stuff. China doesn't want to export, etc., etc. Plus, there have been a lot of issue in supply chains. We've just seen in the semiconductor industry, to say for as one cause. Also, a lot of demand production has shifted to Vietnam and Cambodia, and they cannot produce at the same price level or price match as China. So that's one reason. And that's why we have a low global growth number from IMF. The second reason we have, JP Morgan has recently published the fact that there's 40% chance for US to get into a recessionary phase. And recession, we all know, is global contraction, economic growth contraction, supply contraction, everything contraction. And I also want to take this moment to highlight that if global growth is 2.5% or less than 2.5%, we classify it as a global recession anyway. So 3.1, 3.2% are not far from 2.5. But the main causes basically are reduction in demand, reduction in consumer spending, increase in policy uncertainty, increase in tariffs, and things of that sort.
Right. So, Dr. Aima, and I understand what you're saying in terms of the multiple factors that are affecting the way that the current trajectory is going. But for our general audience to understand also, how exactly then do you predict this trend to change, and what will be the key factors in allowing that to happen? And whether or not, given policies by countries such as the US of increasing tariffs, we're nowhere close to that changing, for example, can then really sustain this in the longer term, because in effect they're also harming US interests.
Okay, this is more of a economic and philosophy question than anything else. The thing is, economies always go in a boom bust cycle, and this cycle has been witnessed since decades, and we are no new to these cycles. Post 2000, globally, we saw a huge, massive increase in demand. We saw massive increases in growth. We saw massive increases in salaries, and stock markets were booming, etc. So we saw that like 2 decades of real growth where everything was prospering. And then fast forward, we came to COVID, and there was Ukraine war crisis, and there's Russian war crisis, and then there is Middle East, Israel, Gaza war crisis, and all these. So accumulating the effect of all these things, global oil supply crisis, etc., until we have, in order to see this growth cycle again, until we don't see an innovation or some global impact in human development, we won't be able to see any growth, because economies move in a path called the saddle path, and that brings economies to equilibrium. When you move away from equilibrium with the factors of production, for example, land, labor, technology, etc., when you're moving away from equilibrium, it's a natural cycle that you will somehow be pulled back towards that equilibrium. So what was happening is everything was growing out of proportion. There were 400% and 500% profit in IT, and 500% profit in stock markets, and that's quite an artificial thing. It's not sustainable. So we are going back to those sustainable positions using the saddle path phenomenon in economics. And in order to see another growth, there'll either be a breakthrough in renewable energy. So, we're combating carbon emissions, and there's renewable energy all of a sudden, and we, abolish the old sort of vehicles and stuff, and there's new technology, etc. Or we see something very drastic in terms of technology, and we see some, with demand also, with consumer demand, if the consumer is buying the same thing over and over again, they become saturated. So demand cycle has become saturated. So we need to see some innovation. So these are the kind of things, and there's a lot of space and a lot of room for development, for new entrepreneurs, for third world countries, including Pakistan, to, build their comparative advantages. And that is how we will see new growth. But definitely there's a saturation level, and there's a cycle that the economy follows, countries' economies, global economy, and we're definitely going through that or towards the recessionary phase for sure.
Right. In terms of how we're taking a look at the way that different markets are being effective, we'd of course like to understand what that would mean for Pakistan and for the way that businesses are functioning here. There's obviously, of course, a lot of factors that we're still dealing with in terms of conditionalities by the IMF, in terms of the bailout package, in terms of the reforms that are needed. What is this uncertainty adding to for Pakistan, and what would that mean in terms of what we need to be doing even now for planning ahead?
So Pakistan is very unique in terms of its own nature. monetary policy is quite ineffective in Pakistan. So the kind of monetary policy tools we've been using for the interbank rates for the economy to kind of, start accelerating haven't worked. And even now, there's naysay that the policy rate is going to come down to 7% and the economy is going to work. Well, how is the economy going to work if your industry is not working? So that's one thing. However, with the IMF report, it shows that there's weak governance in Pakistan. There's a lot of corruption in different sectors, judiciary, politicians, etc. My question, and the thing that I very often ponder upon, is that when we went into the extended fund facility, 37 months facility, IMF demanded us to reduce our government expenditure. And unfortunately, our government expenditure has only risen and it hasn't decreased by even 1%. So until we don't reduce those expenses,
Right. Unfortunately, Dr. Aamna, I've lost your voice and I'm unable to hear you in terms of what you were adding to it. But it's important, of course, to understand what impact it creates on Pakistan. And I think we might be able to hear you again now. Let's try one more time. Can you hear me, Dr. Aamna?
yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, so I was saying that it's a great opportunity for Pakistan to reap a lot of benefits out of the situation if we look into things such as data houses, because we have a surplus of electricity being produced in the country right now and we don't have that much demand and we're already paying our RPPs. So if we plan and build things such as data houses, we have a very, very talented people who are specialized. The youth is specialized in using IT, software programming. So these are the things that we can really work on. We have a Pakistan steel mill. If we start working on it with Russia, Russia is willing to invest in that, so that's a great avenue. If we renegotiate our debts, also if we start and privatize PIA that we've started again, we can do that thing. We can sell out our Recodic on very lucrative terms. So these are the things, and then we bring this capital in, and then we invest in our youth, we invest in industries, and we also have a very handsome fund for carbon, this entire environmental fund, etc., from the IMF and World Bank. So we use it in the correct way, and we can actually export our elect. We have a lot of sunlight. We can generate more elect, and we can export it in the region. So there are lots of things that we can be competitive in, given the things that the IMF report has highlighted. It has highlighted that there is lack of governance, there is lack of regulation. So governance means that we cut down the amount of bribery and all these things, and regulation means if it's elect or if it's gas or if it's whatever, it's education, if it's health, we regulate it. We control our lobbying and monopoly and cartels. If we control that culture, the country will prosper, as even in an overnight. This is not impossible. If we start restructuring the whole system, we can do all that. So
Absolutely, and this is, of course, very, very essential. Thank you very much, Dr. Aamna, Mehdi, for joining us and being a part of the newsroom. It is something that needs to be done, not just in terms of what Pakistan intends to put forward, but of course the uncertainty that the entire international community is facing is something that can be met with more stringent planning and more reformative measures that are put in place ahead of time to making sure that the effects of these uncertainties are minimized. That's all that we have from the newsroom today. We'll now see you tomorrow.